Hi there. Some of you may know me, and some of you may not. I am Father Rogers Meredith. I live here in Bertram, Texas. I am priest in charge of St. Boniface Anglican Chapel of Bertram, Texas, and I'm also assistant priest at St. Chad's Anglican Church of San Antonio, Texas. St. Boniface is a parish in the Anglican Catholic Church, Diocese of New Orleans, and St. Chad's is in the APA, and we're all part of that group, which is known as the 4G. The sermon, though, is for the parish at St. Chad's. I was asked to do a video sermon and then probably also some Sunday school lessons by the bishop for the parish there. We are having to live stream like a lot of folks are now, and hope to be able to return to church together soon. In the meantime, though, this is what we're doing, and I was very glad to be able to help, and very glad to be able to do this. I've never, though, done anything like this before. I've never done a video sermon. I've never sat down in front of the computer and looked at myself as I recorded. The background you see here is our home, and if you could see maybe a little better, you'll see a lot of pictures of my ancestors and things like that, but that's not what we're here to consider this afternoon. What we are here for, though, is a sermon on, or taken from, not the lectionary, but from the letter to the Hebrews. I'll read the text to you here in just a second, but let me begin with prayer. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. So the text for the sermon is taken from, as I said, Hebrews. It's Hebrews chapter 2. I'm going to start with verse 10. For it was fitting that he, for whom and by whom all things exist, and bringing many sons to glory, should make the founder of their salvation perfect through suffering. For he who sanctifies and those who are sanctified all have one source. This is why he's not ashamed to call them brothers, saying, I will tell of your name to my brothers. In the midst of the congregation I will sing your praise. And again, I will put my trust in him. And again, behold, I and the children God has given me. Since, therefore, the children share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise partook of the same things, that through death he might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is, the devil, and deliver all those who, through fear of death, were subject to lifelong slavery. For surely it is not angels that he helps, but he helps the offspring of Abraham. Therefore he had to be made like his brothers in every respect, so that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in the service of God to make propitiation for the sins of the people. For because he himself has suffered when tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted. The word of the Lord. When I first started reading the Bible in earnest, it struck me in several places as being very odd. I remember reading the story of Abraham and his experiences with the smoking pot and all that stuff in the Old Testament, and then reading Hebrews, or having actually Hebrews read to us in worship by our pastor, and thinking that is just the strangest, weirdest thing I've ever heard. It was unintelligible. I had really no idea what was going on with the letter. It's odd to think, at least to me, that the Hebrews, as long as it is, and as complex and complicated as it is, was probably a sermon. So think about that. Think about people that could sit down in one sitting and listen to Hebrews and presumably understand the whole thing, or at least most of it. It's a lot different than today. Hebrews is interesting for a lot of reasons. Linguistically, it's probably some of the hardest, or maybe it's better to say some of the best Greek that you're going to find in the New Testament. Lots of other things that we could say. We don't know who wrote it. There are a lot of theories as to who wrote it. I believe Luther thought, oh gosh, I can't even think who Luther thought right now. Can't even remember who Luther thought it was that wrote Hebrews. It said that Paul wrote it. My opinion is, well, first of all, I don't know, but I wonder at times if maybe Luke wrote Hebrews. The Greek in the introduction to Luke and also the introduction to the Acts of the Apostles sounds a lot like what we find in Hebrews. But really, it's all just sort of important but interesting discussion. It may be sort of background stuff, the kind of stuff you'd probably find in a commentary if you were to take on reading a commentary on Hebrews. At any rate, there are things in the background, though, that are important and that, can help us to understand what's going on. We have to have a context, and there is certainly context that the letter was written in. There are things going on. What one of our challenges is to figure out what it was going on and sort of what sparked the writer to write the letter that we call Hebrews. I think that what was going on in Hebrews was the same thing that was going on in most, if perhaps maybe all, of the New Testament. In other words, the reason the writer was writing was the same reason that just about everybody else in the New Testament wrote. And that reason is this. The church was being faced with apostasy. In other words, there was a really strong urge and a real strong, a very real possibility that people in the early church would turn back, would quit, would give up. Now, certainly, in Paul's letters and in the other epistles of the New Testament, we have pastoral advice and those sorts of things. But all that advice and all the things that we find there that come to us from those letters take place in the context of a letter, a document written to people who were very much being tempted to quit and to give up on their faith. You find that explicitly in Hebrews, and again in Hebrews chapter 2, where this sermon is taken from for today. We're warned about the danger of, as the writer puts it, drifting away. You'll have to excuse me when I look away. I've got my notes over here. Of course, I would normally have them down on the pulpit, but I'm really not able to do that. I'm sitting at our dining room table right now. So there was this strong pressure to give up, to quit, to drift away, to go back to what they once were. And in this instance, in this context, that probably what's in mind is is Judaism and the Old Covenant, the Old Covenant practices, the temple service, and those sorts of things. Now that that's all maybe a little esoteric for us today. I can give you sort of an example, and maybe one that would fit well with those of you who are in the continuum and perhaps were at one time part of what is now called Akusa. I was actually baptized in the Episcopal Church, and so I used myself, the Episcopal Church here in Austin, St. David's. I used myself as an example. So imagine I'm sitting here in the BTX in Bertram, Texas on a maybe Saturday afternoon. It's rainy, and there's a knock at the door. Dog's barking, and I get up and open the door, and lo and behold, there stands a bishop, an Episcopal bishop. And he says, and I say, good afternoon, Your Grace. And he says, are you Rogers Meredith? And I say, yes, I am. And he says, I understand that you were baptized at St. David's in Austin, and that you are a member of the Episcopal Church. And I guess, yes, technically, though, now I am a priest in the one of the 4G churches, and of course, and then he stops me right then and there and says, listen, I'm here to tell you something. I'm here to make an offer to you. And that's this. Either you go back to being an Episcopalian, you go back to Akusa, you forsake everything that you find in the 1928 Book of Common Prayer and all the doctrine and stuff that you were taught, and have learned, and you go back. You go back to what you once were. And if you don't do that, we're going to kill you. So go back or die. Quit your journey then, here and now, and no one gets hurt. Can you imagine that actually happening? Well, maybe not from Makusa, but that temptation and that sort of language has faced the church from the very first, from the very beginning. And really, it can be boiled down to this, or it can be expressed probably clearer in this idea or statement. The church continually, again from the very first, very start, has faced the temptation to forego the cross. Now that's a temptation that Jesus himself faced. You know, if you've read Luke and you're familiar at all with Luke chapter 4, 3 and 4, but the beginning opening chapters of Luke, you know that Jesus was tempted by Satan. And all those temptations, although they were different, you know, slightly different in their own way, they were basically temptations to forego the cross. Just quit, give up, Jesus, and no one gets hurt. Trade the future, trade freedom, trade your faith for security. Just quit. Just sit there. Just shelter in place. Everything's going to be all right. Wow. Well, what does Hebrews say to that? Well, the answer is this. And it's a theme that really runs through the whole book. And it's a theme that answers the question or answers that tendency and the draw to apostatize. It's this: the superiority of Christ. Christ is absolutely superior to everything. Everything created is dependent and subservient to him. All creatures and all angels, everything that exists, that God has made through Christ, belongs to and are under his domain. So great. Christ is it. Christ is preeminent. And that's the answer. But, you know, as good an answer and as great an answer and as important an answer there is, underlying that answer still, there's an apparent problem. And that is this. Christ held fast. Yes, Christ went through temptation. Christ stood the test of time. Christ did everything he was supposed to do. He faced everything that he faced through faith. But yes, he still died. Yet he died. And he died not just a death, but a public spectacle of a death. The death of the cross. I was reading a little thing on Wikipedia last night about Roman crucifixion. And of course, I've been, seminary and through the course of hearing a lot of people preach and things like that, I've had the crucifixion and its agonies described to me. I've heard those described. But reading about it sort of from a little different, maybe a little more academic, if you call Wikipedia academic perspective, it was really, it really kind of drove home what crucifixion was about. And the main thing about it was that it was public. It was a death of public humiliation. So look where you can think about it like this, that this maybe underlying tension, maybe not a problem, but a tension is there. Christ held fast. Christ held fast through the pull. Christ didn't quit, but he still died. Well, in this problem, in this tension, there is the solution. So while the life, death, and resurrection of Christ may have had a tension of sorts, we've got to understand that Christ's dying is actually the solution to the problem that the people during the time that the letter to the Hebrews was written and to us today face, to the problem to quit. So what the writer tells us is this: Christ's suffering and Christ's death have not brought humanity to ruin. Christ's perseverance to those things has not brought us to shame, or has not caused us to lose everything that we had or that were promised. Rather, Christ's suffering and death has brought humanity to perfection. It's brought mankind into fellowship with God and glory. Christ's suffering and death has brought humanity in the person of Christ into the fellowship of the Trinity. And that device that Satan, the devil, once used, that death that the devil once used to enslave men through the fear of death, Christ has turned that into victory and freedom. Christ has turned death on its head. You probably have heard, or maybe you've heard of that great book by the Puritan author John Owen, The Death of Death and the Death of Christ. Well, he gets that from Hebrews. That which the devil once used as a threat, God through Christ has taken and brought freedom to us all. Christ has turned that which once enslaved us into freedom forever. And so when we are faced with the prospect of death, and when we're faced with the prospect of trading freedom and faith and hope for security now, because we're afraid of death, we're called to remember that Jesus died and was raised, and in raising, he has brought us all who are connected to him to new life forever. Christ's resurrection guarantees our resurrection, and so death is emptied of its power to enslave, and to enslave us by fear. Now that's good news, certainly. And of course, we know that the gospel is really just another way of talking about good news. And I think that it probably is the case, I believe it, or understand that probably is the case, that Paul can hardly speak of the good news of the gospel without talking about the life, death, and particularly the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And so that good news is brought to us as a remedy against the fear of death, but there's more. There's more at the end of this letter. There's a whole lot more. Now, I remember at one of our commencement ceremonies at Toronto Baptist Seminary, where I studied, Reverend Art Azurdia preached a sermon on this that he called sympathetic resonance. Now, the sermon was directed towards seminary students and really talked about the dangers and discouragements of the pastoral ministry, and how in those discouragements that we were all going to face, there was someone in heaven that knew exactly how we felt, and he called that he called that sympathetic resonance. And what sympathetic resonance is this: if you have a guitar or another stringed instrument, musical instrument in your house, maybe sitting in its case, and you have also a piano. If you go up to the piano and you hit low E, you know what's going to happen if your piano's tuned and your guitar is tuned at least pretty close. If you hit that low E key, the low E string on your guitar is going to vibrate. They both vibrate in the same key. The two notes vibrate together. Even though they might be 25, 30 feet apart, they still do that. And that's important for us. It's important for those that were going into pastoral ministry, but it's also important for those of us who are now, particularly now, faced with a temptation to quit, to give up our faith, to give up our hope for security, to say, it's all too much, I don't want to die, I'm afraid of dying, and I'm just gonna sit here and I'm not going to do anything. There's someone who knows that fear. There's someone who's faced that fear. There's someone who's gone through that fear and come out on the other side. And that's Christ in his humanity. And he's now in heaven. And he knows how we feel. We have a string in heaven that resonates when we're afraid, when we want to quit, when we want to give up, when we want to go back. We have someone there who can help and who cares. Amen.